All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into episode 33 of Destination the Show. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. It's that time of the year where we kind of have all of the sports getting into fun times,
Yep.
and so I'm excited. And I'm excited for this one because it'll be heavy draft, and I might not love the draft anymore as much as you do, uh, but the draft is always super fun to talk about, and getting insight on how things work is the nerdy part of me too. So this will be great. How are you doing? More
I'm
importantly.
I'm doing well. I don't think that I've ever been more excited for a conversation that we're going to have on this show. Um, which like don't take it personal, right? But um I don't want to. We can do our banter stuff afterwards, but we have a guest lined up for today, which I think is incredibly exciting. So I'll just throw it back to you to introduce that guest, and then we'll get rolling.
Yeah, so we've had just a couple of guests so far, but this guest is and I want to get this title right, Vice President of Amateur Scouting for the Minnesota Twins, Sean Johnson. And so we're going to add Sean in. Boom, he's in. Sean, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're excited, and so we're just going to get right into it. As I mentioned, vice president of amateur scouting. But tell us a little bit about your history with the Twins, the path you've taken through baseball. You've been in the Twins organization for quite some time. So what are the roles that you've had, and how did all of those things prepare you for your current role now as the guy that's at the very top of the list in the media guide?
Yeah. So I started with the Twins in March of 2002. It's a long time ago. I was an area scout in the Four Corners for 5 years. And then I was Darren Johnson, who was the scouting director before me, was the West Coast supervisor. So I got to work with him kind of all the way up here. I took over for Darren doing the West Coast for a decade. When Darren was the scouting director, and then so this will be my 8th season uh, in charge of the draft. So it's gone pretty fast. I can't believe this is year 23, but I've loved every second of it, and just really proud and honored to be a Minnesota Twin for that long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our first conversation was probably, shoot, it might have been 12, 13 years ago, which is crazy. And at that point you were the West Coast scouting supervisor, and now you're here, and we're doing this. So one thing that I'm really curious about is, I think for fans, right? For whether we're a fan of the team or a fan of the draft or a fan of the minor leagues, like the calendar is set, right? So the games start in late March or early April. You know when the end of the season is going to be, you know, the World Series is going to be. For the most part, up until recently, you knew that the draft was going to be in June. Now you know it's going to be All-Star Weekend. So as far as your year goes, how does that work? So when does the draft cycle end? When does the draft cycle start? When do you start looking at next year's draft versus this year's draft? And what does the flow of the year look like just in general for you and your team?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll start with the end of. Let's go with day 3 of the draft. The draft ends, it wraps up. We try to sign all the players we just drafted and get those guys into the system. There's events. There's actually overlap now that the draft is in July. There's events for next year's class that happens that we have to try to cover a little bit before we get to this actual draft coming up in July, which is a bit of a headache, but it is what it is. So when the draft ends, we're off. There's a couple big high school showcases. First week of August, East Coast Pro Showcase out in Hoover, Alabama is a big one. And then the area code games out in California is the other big one. So we'll dig into the high school crop. We'll see a lot of those players right away. There's Cape Cod coverage. There's summer league coverage. So we're seeing some of the better players for next year's draft class. We're trying to see them a little bit in the summer with wood bats, get a feel for where they are. Team USA is a big event for us to cover. You're seeing most of the best players for next year's class on that team. They're either there or Cape Cod or sometimes the Northwoods League. So once we get through the summer, we've kind of created our pool for the next year's draft. The college guys we've targeted and highlighted from the summer, and most of them we've seen, their freshman, sophomore years. Our area scouts and our supervisors will do a lot of work in the colleges, and those it's staggered because of, the weather in the fall. But so the Midwest and Oklahoma and Texas, those teams are going in September, whereas like a UCLA or a Miami they might practice in the fall until Thanksgiving or after that. So we're seeing college players in the fall. That's when in the winter, kind of the December, January months is when our area scouts will start doing home visits with the better high school players, getting to know their families, developing a relationship, and that sort of thing. So then January hits, the junior colleges fire up about the last week of January. You've got preseason scrimmages for the bigger colleges that crank up. And then, really once opening day of the D1 season starts, we're pretty much full throttle. That's when our cadence is really the highest. And so we've got the players we want to see targeted, that we want to see early. And then we usually script out the first 3 or 4 weekends for every scout on our staff, where they're going to be, who they're going to see. And that usually gets us off on a good track. And then, players move up and down the spring. So we adjust our schedules pretty much every week for the scouts that cover the entire country. And it's a lot of communication between, February to May. We're talking a lot. We're adjusting a lot. We're talking players every day. And then, that's one advantage of the July draft is we're able to, with a June draft, you're up against conference tournaments, there's regionals, and then the draft's there. So now we have a combine, in June, where we can get to know some of these players at a deeper level, connect with them, get a last look, and we have more time that leads up until the draft. So that's pretty much the calendar.
Right on. So what I hear you saying, Sean, is the baseball never stops for you guys. Pretty much
No.
wire to wire. So one thing, Sean, I was curious about in kind of preparing for this conversation, right, is learning a little bit more about your job title and your specific responsibilities, right? Because I think organizations do this a little bit differently. But one thing that's kind of noted on the Twins website is that you are, responsible for establishing the Twins amateur scouting philosophies. So I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you and the organization try to approach player evaluation, and what are some of the important principles that you have found in this role that are important when you or your team are assessing a player?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's kind of a fancy thing that I'm supposed to be responsible for. I don't know if I think about establishing philosophies every day, to be honest. But, I think the biggest thing, if I think about that question, I think it's important that we're just always evolving. We're always thinking about our process. The game is changing all the time, especially with information and how players are evaluated, the tools we have to evaluate players. Are we implementing too many of those things? Are we implementing enough? Is there something we should pay more attention to? And that's something, just a 30,000 foot view every now and then, just looking back and are we doing this the best way we should? Is there something we can do better? And that's something that's on my mind and a lot of other people's on our team. That's what we think about all the time. Are we doing this the best way we can? But at the end of the day, we want to send our scouts out to fall in love and like players and want players. And that's always been the root of our process. Now, the layers we add on with analytics and everything else, that's always secondary. But my job is basically to keep morale up, make our scouts want to be here and want to be Twins and think it's a great place to work, and I want it to be the best place they ever work in their career. That's very important to me. So if all our scouts are doing a great job, going the extra mile every day that they can, doing the extra work on a player than when we need it, then I think we'll have good outcomes. So it's really just, I'm thinking about our process all the time and what can we do differently. I just don't want our group to ever become stale. And I don't think,
Mhm.
from top down, from Derek Falvey down, like that's really our mindset is what's the next thing, right? It's not to change just to change, but if there's something we can do a little bit better, let's give it a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates for sure. So speaking of information and evolving your process, one comment I've often heard you make around draft weekend when you tend to be a bit more visible to the media is how collaborative you all are in the draft room and in the process. And something I'm curious about is the role that Twins player development plays in how you identify and select talent, because I would imagine that that's something you consider, right? Like what does the Twins organization do well in terms of player development? What are our strengths there on the pitching side, on the hitting side? And I'm curious, how much impact does that have on who you pay close attention to and who you might end up picking on a given draft weekend?
Yeah, several good questions in there. I'll start with the collaboration piece. I think that's one thing over the last few years. That's what we've really tried to take to the next level is the relationship with our scouting department and our player development department. So it's nice that, to be office at a Target Field because the PD guys are right next door and we get to go to lunch. We get to talk. We talk about what's going well, what needs to be better, how's this player doing? We thought he had good makeup. Do you think he has good makeup too? Or what did we miss? So we're always kind of it's a lot of checks and balances there with that group. And, I collaboratively, we always show a picture in the draft room of, it's a draft from like, I don't know, somewhere in the mid 90s. And there's 5 people in this room in the Metrodome down in Carl Polad's old dining room. And that was the people in the draft room looking at manila folders and making decisions off of just the reports that they had. And our room now has 45 people in it. So the voices have multiplied by a lot. And, I think that's one thing we try to incorporate all the resources, all the video we see, all the numbers we analyze, bringing all those things together in the draft room is really like, it's obviously the draft's the funnest week of the year for us, but bringing all those things together, looking at a player from so many more viewpoints than we used to is really huge. And one of those voices, our player development people are involved. They are looking at video. They're already bought in. So they've looked at tape of Walker Jenkins and Luke Keeschel, and our pitching people have looked at Charlie Soto, and they've given us their opinion. Our scouts go out, see the players. Our PD people give their opinion because that's what they do. They look at swings, they look at deliveries all year long, and they have a different perspective. So we're bringing lots of different perspectives to the table and kind of getting it all out there. And that's really what we look for in the draft room is when all those opinions kind of line up, they support one another. And that's kind of our sweet spot in the draft.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that there's 45 people in the draft room. If you had room for 2 more, I'm sure Jamie and I would fill those seats willingly and keep our opinions to ourselves because obviously we don't know nearly as much as you. But I'm super fascinated. I've said that to you before about how the whole thing comes together, right? And so you talked a little bit before about how there's some overlap, right? So the big events kind of start to happen as the draft starts to kick off. But there's thousands, and maybe that's an underestimation of eligible players to be drafted in any given year. And so how do you narrow that number down, right? And we've talked about this before years and years and years ago about how small your board actually gets, and maybe that's changed over time. But do you start that with teams like, okay, we're gonna hit the SEC and then we're gonna find the players, the draft eligible players, or is it that you've seen the teams in prior years, right? So you're already aware of these players that are on this list. And then how does that list continue to narrow from hundreds of thousands of names to, 900, about 600 draft picks. But the Twins board, I'd assume, is even less than that. So how do we go from hundreds of thousands to a few hundred names, and do it in a way that it's easy, it's collaborative, and then the board is there on draft night, so there doesn't have to be a whole lot of, cramming, really, right? Because you're on the clock. How does that whole process take place?
Well, I think, at our peak, we probably used to turn in 900 to 1,000 players. This is when I started. Now that we had 50 rounds then, now we have 20. So we know we don't need as many names to get through 20 rounds. So our eyesight's a little bit more towards the very top of the players that we like. So we don't have to do quite as much work on all those other players. You don't just turning players in because they may get drafted. It's really hard to get drafted now in the top 20 rounds. You got to be a pretty good player. So we've kind of reduced that aspect of it. I think the biggest thing we try to do is, we spend a lot of time on scheduling. That's one thing our group kind of prides ourselves on is communication and scheduling and making sure that we're not all showing up at the same game every week. So a lot of those matchups, like the big tournaments, now they're at Globe Life. The first 3 weekends, you can see a ton of players by sitting in one spot. It's indoors. You're going to get the games in. So that's why you see 100 scouts at those events, because you can see six good teams in one weekend and not have to travel all over the place to get it done. So we look for the big events, the big matchups. If two high school players are going to play each other on the same day, we want to go see that. Wherever you can get more bang for your buck is kind of our MO, pretty much all spring long. But I think the industry, the industry signs somewhere between 80 to 100 high school players every year, roughly. But you have to spend a lot of time on the high school players trying to whittle through, especially in today's world where there's velocity everywhere. There's a bunch of guys throwing 95 and 6 that may not get drafted because, they don't look like starters, or they end up going to college and doing well. And you just can't run them all down. So you have to go back to your summer looks and who you liked and who you think are the top players are, and then just try to see them as much as you can.
Right on. Sean, I'm curious because you mentioned high school players specifically, and that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest differences in evaluating high school versus college players? I think for, fans who maybe have a passing or a casual interest, college is so much easier because access to the games is so prevalent now. But I'm curious also if high school player evaluation has changed significantly in your time in this role with just the data explosion in baseball in the past 5 to 10 years in particular.
Yeah. So as far as the technology boom, we have more information now on high school players that show up at these events that are held in big league parks where you have exit velocities and whatever else you want to know about a player or a pitcher. So we have some data and information to support those high school players that we didn't have 20 years ago. So I guess that's one thing that's a little bit different. But in general, high school players, you have a lot more to figure out. There's more guesswork to do. Let's say Royce Lewis and Dylan Cruz were in the same draft.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Cruz has a track record of not striking out and performing, and he's just further along the road. Where Royce Lewis, you're doing a lot more dreaming on what he could be, what he might be, and you don't know a lot. There's more of a leap of faith with a high school player, no matter really who they are. There's a few, Ken Griffey, and there's a short list of guys like that where you're pretty sure Alex Rodriguez is going to be pretty good, right, if you saw him in high school. But a lot of them, there's more guesswork to do, where the college players if you're a good player in the SEC and you can command the strike zone and strike out 50% like Paul Skeens did, it's a pretty good signal that you're going to be a major league player. So it takes a little bit of the risk out of it. There's more certainty. There's sometimes a lower ceiling. But what scouts usually love to do, and our group does it all the time, is we like to go in and walk into a park and see a high school player with tools and just dream about what he could be. And that's risky, and that's also rewarding. And teams end up on both sides of the coin with that.
I'm going to ask you a question because you brought up Royce Lewis, and I know that right after he was drafted, I mean, obviously an elite prep baseball player, but one of the things that you talked a lot about was his makeup. He's an 80 grade makeup, right? I mean, it would be hard to not say that. Are there other examples of guys? Because Royce Lewis is from a fan's perspective, just different, right? He gets hurt, but he's positive. He gets hurt again, and he's positive, and he's always smiling. And are there other guys that you can think of that have makeup like that? Because to me, it's 80, but it's only 80 because it doesn't go any higher. Like,
Yeah.
Is it so unique? Because am I off on this one? It seems like he's got the best attitude out of any human on the entire earth.
Yeah, his ability to stay positive through the injuries he's gone through is amazing. Not every player would be able to do that. And John Levitt, our area scout who signed him, I remember at the time, said that's the best. He's got the best makeup of any player he's ever scouted, and he's scouted 30 years, and he's seen a lot. So I think just for fans, what you see Royce Lewis do in the major leagues at Target Field or wherever he's playing, it's pretty much exactly how he acted, behaved, performed in high school in Southern California. He always had that energy, the love to play the game, the bounce, the smile, all those things you're seeing. It's just there's more people in the stands now than back when we saw him, as a 17-year-old. He hasn't changed really one bit, and most of the time they don't change. But it is different. Like you see, you're thinking of other people like Byron Buxton was a bashful, shy kid from Baxley, Georgia. And you meet him and you're like, man, you shouldn't be that bashful. You're like a total stud. You're like the freakiest athlete I've ever seen. Right. But, we had he didn't have a lot to say. And now he's this charismatic guy as a fully grown man. And you can hardly recognize the personality. So sometimes they change and sometimes they don't. But the way Royce plays is exactly how he played back in 2017.
Yeah, that's super fun. A success story. I hope the guy can get healthy and stay healthy. All right, so getting back to our plan here. We talked a little bit about the draft board. Jamie works really hard on this consensus board, which I use as a tool because everybody's got different opinions, but this is a great place that he pulls them all together. And for fans who like to see these things like mock drafts, right? It's obviously different being on the other side of things. So you talked about how kind of February through the draft is when the communication really starts. When do the names start to get put up on the board, or is that just this fictional thing that we made up, right? Because the draft boards are always really secretive. They're like or draft rooms. They're like they got the foggy, blurry looks, and no one really knows what's going on in there. When does that process start, and what does that process look like?
As far as putting our board together?
Yeah.
So, I mean, our board comes together pretty late. We have Ezra Wise who basically runs our R&D that is as it pertains to the amateur draft. And he's amazing. He'll give me, no one really sees our list until the very end after we've seen all the players. We're not going to games anymore. And then we'll start to kind of release what that board kind of looks like. So when we walk into our room, our model order is kind of in place. And then from there, we just kind of fine tune what the list looks like and who we like, player A versus player B. Let's talk about it. And we do that right at the very end. So we're pretty efficient at this point. We usually meet for 5 days and we can kind of get it done in that time frame. There's some teams that meet for 2 weeks, which I think I'd lose my mind if we were bottled up in a meeting room for 2 weeks straight. So every team does a little bit different, but that's kind of our process.
Does that change, or has that changed since the draft got later, just because the baseball's kind of slowed down for the majority of these players?
Yeah, like I said, the later draft with the combine put in there now allows us to, we know who we need to talk to at the combine. We've got a list of, and teams interview anywhere from 30 to 90 players in that time span. And so we kind of know who we need to target, who we need to connect with. We're trying to do a lot of work on who's going where, just like everyone else with their mock drafts that are out there. They're trying to figure out what the industry is doing. And we focus on that to some degree, but by the time we get into the room, we're going to go with the people in our room. That's all we care about. We don't care if team X is taking this player in the first round and we have him in the third round. I'm sure that team has a guy in the third round that we like in the first. So you have to stick to your guns. You got to stick with your people, and trust is like one of the biggest things that drives us. Is we believe in our scouts, and we're going to go with them right or wrong. And it's easy to get distracted by all the noise with all the mock drafts, and I pay attention to the mocks as we get closer. They have more intelligence as we get to the very end, but
right.
Unless you're out seeing all these players, which we're like the only people on the earth doing that, it's hard to get that board in any kind of order. So, yeah, I guess that's my take on mock drafts.
Yeah, that makes that makes a ton of sense.
So Sean, speaking of other teams, right? And like how they value players, something I'm curious about, or this occurred to me, and I wanted to ask you about, because you've been through, a good amount of cycles as the person kind of leading this room now. Do you find during the draft that there are other organizations who share, or you may have come to the conclusion that share similar philosophies or seem to have similar player preferences and profiles that they like? Like, are there teams that you have found that have similar draft boards as you're going through the process over the years?
Yeah, there are three. I can give it the total. There's three that are very similar to ours pretty much every year. There's a couple of years where they'll kind of go off. But a lot of times if they're taking players that we like, and they'll tell us that we took players that they liked. And I think we all kind of know it. I won't say who they are, but it's amazing which teams are. We're they're all analytical teams that use a model, and it's kind of creepy sometimes, because we'll just text them during the draft like, hey, get off our board, like stop taking the guys we like.
I can't wait to play that guessing game for the next 10 years. Awesome.
I feel like we've already done that.
Yeah,
you and I have done that. Okay. Do you, and this is not another one that I'm just thinking of, do you then, after the draft, is there part of the team or a couple individuals that look like maybe they're teams like that, or maybe they're teams the complete opposite, where you then go back and say, okay, what was this team looking for? And then how successful are they 3-4 years from now? Right. I mean, you might take a team, and I won't throw any teams, but there's some teams that I during the draft, I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what they're thinking. And then looking back based on how you had those, what? No, not you. Maybe another team maybe a team in the division, but that then you look back and you say, okay, what were they looking for? And then play that game that way. I know you said we focus on ours, we stick with our guys, but is that ever, maybe not so much you, but is there anybody in the organization that has that task?
Well, I mean, we'll do that. It's not a real exercise, but we'll sit there after the end of day one and day two and look at what other teams did and who they took. And yeah, that made sense, or that was kind of weird. That's not usually their type of player. So there's a lot of that conversation happening in real time. When the dust settles, we're looking at everybody else's drafts and who they took, and what other teams drafted we like in the moment. We'll do that a lot. It's just like a thing we've always done.
Yeah, because I mean, I think for me it would be very similar to, like, you do this so much, but you also then just kind of become a fan of the draft, right? You have to love the draft to be so involved, right? I mean, that just seems that seems like a normal thing. I'm not going to get us off task anymore. The comp pick for Sonny Gray comes with a $2.75 million price tag. How at all, if at all, does that change your process and planning up to the draft? Does it just allow you more flexibility? And then if the Twins were to trade that pick, how disappointing is that?
I'll answer the second question first. It's always like a little disappointing because you want as many picks as you can. That's just what we do. We'd love to have a ton of picks, but it's also part of the deal. So whatever, just like when you're one of the players we've drafted gets traded or put in a deal, it's a little deflating at first, but it's just part of the business. So the way we look at the 275 is it's just extra pool money. We can, it's another spin of the wheel. So we get an extra pick and a chance to get another good player. How we use that money, it just gives you more options, right? You could use that 275 on another pick, a later pick, the one in front of it, or just, play it straight. So you've got options, and, the more the merrier there. So same with the comp B pick we have too. That's even more picks and more options and more money to get creative if we want to do that.
Right on. Okay. So Sean, something I'm curious about is you've talked a lot about continuously reflecting on your process as a team and kind of, evaluating it, continually learning, working to make it better, and so on and so forth. Something that I was curious about that struck me while you're talking through that is, given how long it takes for tangible results from draft classes sometimes, right? We could see a draft class where we don't see a player make a major league impact for a significant amount of time, 3, 4, 5 years. How do you and the team evaluate your performance and tweak your process when sometimes those tangible outcomes and impacts from players can take such a long time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, we spend our goal is this, we're looking for good process with good luck. You can have bad process and good luck. We picked this player. We didn't even like him and he turned into an all-star. That would be an example of that. So I think what we're shooting for is good process, good luck. And so, you don't always get good luck, but you can control your process. So we look more at, and the drafts are made, that's what most draft articles are like. Well, this team should have taken this player. What were they thinking? How did Mike Trout get to pick whatever? Like those are the things that are easy to do because so much time has passed, and the warts are fully exposed at this point. We just look at in the moment. Was that the right decision? Did we do all the things we should have? Did we look at these players every way we should have and thought about that decision? Did we exhaust that? And if we can say yes, then we're okay with that. The player, no one bats 1,000 in scouting. It's so humbling. It's so difficult. It seemingly never gets any easier, even though we have more information and everything that's out there. The industry is getting better, but it's not like the first 30 picks in every draft are big leaguers. There's still lots of mistakes, as the media would put them, as mistakes, right? And internally you think it's a mistake. And what did we do wrong? Why did we take this player instead of that player? And you can't beat yourself up all the time, but you should certainly look in the rearview mirror and see, go back and think about, why didn't this player work out? Okay, let's try to learn from that and not do that again. So I think that's the best you can do, because we're still going to have really good picks and really bad picks, and that's part of the deal. And you have to kind of just learn to handle the ups and downs of it. And, it's not always easy, but, whenever you take a player and injury happens or, would you take the player if you could do it all over again? And if the answer is yes, then we can live with that.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting way to look at things too. All right. So for Jamie and I, this is still, we'd call this early in the 2024 cycle, right? Where seasons have started, but we're 3 months away from the draft. For you, we're really closer to the end of the cycle. What are your impressions? And this might be the easiest year to answer this question, but what are some of your impressions about this year's class compared to the 2023 class? Are there any demographics that stand out to you positively or negatively as we approach the 2024 MLB draft?
Yeah, I think most people look at a draft and if it's deep or not or good or not by the first 5 or 10 players. I don't know if that's always fair. Last year's top 5, which ironically wasn't the same 5 that it was in January of last year. One name kind of bounced out, another one showed up. So it's always a volatile thing, but the group at the top, I mean, there's some good players up there. The draft lacks like the locked shortstop and the locked center fielder. It's more corner players, but they're really good hitters. And I think that will be interesting to see how that part shakes out. The college pitching there's been some guys that have held up and some that have taken a step back. Some have broken down. That happens every single spring. I think the one that's a little bit slim is the high school position players. There's really not a clear cut, who's the best high school player in this class, who are the best. If you polled all 30 teams on who the top 5 high school position players, offensively are, you're going to get different orders, maybe different players. And that's usually pretty easy to do, to come up with an upper crust of high school bats. So that one probably stands out the most. And again, like I said, high school pitching, there's velocity all over the place in every state. Seemingly we're all trying to run them down now. So that's probably a decent overview of it, but the college bats are going to be, kind of stacked up towards the top. And I think that's the top 10 will be pretty heavy college. It looks like at this point.
So when do we get to the point where we talk about 4 demographics, but when do we talk about the 5th two-way player demographic? Is that, I mean, it seems like last year there were these guys that showed up and they've all kind of seemed to go away from being two-way guys, but is that something that you're seeing more and more and more, or is this just kind of this trend that is starting because Ohtani's been able to do it at such a freakishly high level?
Yeah, I think we figured there'd be some type of Ohtani effect where you're going to see more players trying to do it, and it's so hard. What he does is not normal. But there has been a couple in the last couple drafts, and it's impressive to go watch those players do both things and do them pretty well. So I don't think it's going away for a while. I bet we see 1 or 2 or more probably over the next few drafts would be my guess.
Yeah, when you say it's not normal, I think that's putting it pretty mildly, because
yeah, that was quite mild.
Yeah, to be such a freaky hitter and then put the glove on and go stand on the mound and be a freaky pitcher, like there's a reason that we don't see that. But that's something that's fascinating to me too. I mean, it's like the opposite of the Bo Jackson thing, right? Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, like they played these sports at these high levels, and then it's like, but it's been such a specialized thing, and so I feel like we should get further and further away from that. And then all of a sudden, boom, this guy comes from Japan and he's able to do it and be unbelievable. Is there anything that we missed on that you want to add before we let you get back to your work?
No, I feel like I talked way too much, like I thought I would. So I think we covered it.
Yeah,
I appreciate the time.
Well, we appreciate the time, and obviously, and when we talked for the first time, I don't remember what year it was. It was a long time ago. Your life has changed. Your life has got busier, right? Your family's expanded.
Yes.
So how does life work as a scout? Because I feel like as a single guy, there's one way that it could work because you don't have to call home, you don't have to check in. But now you're doing the family thing. So how much has that changed, or does that just help keep you level?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly balances things out. I feel like I don't have a lot of free time or any free time at this point in the calendar, between juggling being a husband and a dad, which I love, and I don't get to do enough of this time of year. So my wife's a saint. I don't know why she married me, but it's a daily challenge when you have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and and you're in 5 states in 5 different days, and it's a lot to juggle, but it's all worth it. So I'm lucky.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we appreciate you taking the time, and we'll leave this as an open invitation that you can come talk as long as you want, as often as you want. We do this weekly, and we just, for me, it's just a fascination with all things draft, and so when we can kind of get a peek behind the curtains, I don't think there's really anything better for me, and I'm sure Jamie probably agrees.
For sure. We super appreciate the time. No, you're an incredibly busy man, so we're really grateful.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys caring about what we do. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Sean. We'll sure we'll try to talk again before the draft.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again.
All right. That was awesome, man.
It took you all of like 13 minutes to text me to tell me how amazing that was.
That was awesome. I can't focus on the rest of the things that we have to talk about now because I want to talk about how great that was. But jokes aside, sincere appreciation to Sean Johnson, Vice President of Amateur Scouting with the Minnesota Twins, for giving up time to talk to us and give us a little bit of insight into his team, the work they do, the draft process. Hope everyone enjoys that.
Yeah, and the one thing that, and I'll ask him at some point probably, but in my mind, when he's talking about things, and I think he'll appreciate this because I think we're kind of similar. I just in my mind, it's just there's got to be all these spreadsheets, and all these spreadsheets have all these tabs, right? I mean, how do you organize?
That's so much information.
And that's why, when teams, when they have these breaches of security, when like that to me is this, because there's so much information and there's so much organization of information, and then to hit on guys that come from small schools. I think there's so much, and that's Theo likes to pick on me in the private chat, but I'll never get over how fascinating drafts are. But we're going to talk a little bit about this draft class that's been doing some powerful things.
So powerful things is a good way to put it, Jeremy. And a little bit of gratitude first, because a bunch of people reached out to me in between last week and this week and gave some really good feedback about how they want to consume draft information. So we're going to try something a little bit new and build on something we did last week. And if folks like it, we'll continue. So we're going to divide our draft content into 3 sections here. We'll do some notes because there are some interesting notes at the top of the board that we can digest and dig into. Then we'll talk a little bit about some consensus board updates, some risers and fallers, and a new feature people can check out. And then last but not least, we will kind of walk through, for the 3 organizations that we talk about a lot, if they were drafting by consensus today, who would they be taking? And we'll make that somewhat of a regular habit just to see how that shifts as the board's updated and as we get closer and closer to the draft. And I think for today, we'll probably punt listener questions to next week. Otherwise, we'll be getting really long. But powerful things, before we do that, we got to start with something that's a bummer, which is injuries. So I don't know if you saw this. There was a lot going on last night. Travis Bazzana hit by a pitch on the hand, came out of his game, ended up in a wrap. Did not hear an update on how that's looking. Hopefully it's nothing serious, but certainly something that bears mentioning. JJ Weatherholt also left his game after his second at bat, just returned from a really prolonged and lengthy hamstring injury. So again, we don't have an update there, but injuries that are potentially impacting the top of the board. And I know you hate for guys to get injured and for that to play a part in the process, right?
Yeah, that's a bummer because I mean Weatherholt was the top of your board,
yep,
right at the very beginning, and Bazzana is if not the top of the board right now, the second guy on your board right now.
Yep.
So, if you're drafting 4, 5, 6, 7, and these guys get dinged up, it's probably like, hey, that's not the worst thing.
Yep.
If you're drafted 1, 2, 3, and the guys coming into the cycle that are at the very top,
Yep.
you have to try to determine if they're the right guy while they're not super healthy. That's a bummer.
That is a bummer.
Less of a bummer because the Guardians are drafting first, so they could screw it up, and I'd be okay with that. But yeah, every time someone goes out, whether it's Spencer Strider or a college dude, the sport's the best when everybody's available to play.
Agreed.
And that's why, as a fan of the Timberwolves, watching Zion get hurt yesterday, it's like I want the best players to be playing at the highest level, because that's what makes sports fun. So seeing two of the top 5-ish guys go down, that's a bummer. But on the flip side of that, there's some dudes doing some work.
Oh my gosh. So we talked a couple of weeks ago, Jeremy, about Nick Kurtz and how he was just having a quiet start to the college season, right? I don't think we had said that he struggled. We said that he wasn't getting a lot of pitches to hit. He was getting pitched around quite a bit, walking a ton, but not necessarily doing the kind of damage you might want to see. Well, he has now hit 14 home runs in his last 10 games. Jack Caglione is on a similar type of heater. He hit a home run over the scoreboard yesterday, an estimated 516 feet, which doesn't seem possible.
No, that's absolutely insane.
So let me ask you this question, just off the back of those heaters, because it's really fun to watch and it's entertaining and it's what makes college baseball great. How much do you think in-season performance like this can impact teams' boards and where they might go? That's something I'm always curious about, right? And it's like, how do you weigh the evaluation versus the in-season performance?
Well, I would assume it weighs heavily. And from the perspective of baseball is a series of head-to-head events, right? And so every evaluation, not to oversimplify the game, but it's one-on-one, right? And who's gonna win. So when you have these hot streaks, especially in good conferences or in good teams or against good opponents, you have to recognize that, right? It's not like these are guys doing it at a low level on tiny fields. They're doing absolutely freaky things in the highest level of non-professional baseball, right? Kurtz, like the profile for both of those guys, though, that's the part that gets me, right? And I'm a fan of versatility. I'm a fan of being able to move the guy in the dirt, out of the dirt, around. And I always believe that as myself, that I'm not going to be overly into where these guys are going to end up defensively. But when they profile as first baseman, I just can't get into it.
Yep.
And that's weird to me because both those guys are likely to be first baseman. And that's a little bit of a harder thing. So I love to see it though. 516 feet home runs.
Woo.
Love it.
People should go watch that clip if they didn't get a chance to see it. Okay, so do you want to talk through some consensus board updates, man?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll ask some questions because you're the one that kind of stirs this pot. So you mentioned your number one. Well, you mentioned Bazana getting hit by a pitch and leaving the game. He's still your number one.
He's still there.
But we're going to break this down. Are the up and down arrows? Are they live?
They're live. They're absolutely live.
I get some previews from you now and then. But then if I don't specifically look for them,
there you go. There's one.
Boom. Who do we got there? Yeah, man. Chase Burns.
So here's the new feature that hopefully is cool and people think is cool, but folks are going to need to read the notes at the top of the board to stay on top of this. There's now green up and red down arrows on the board. If anyone moved in the top 10 like one spot, they get an arrow because the top 10 is significant. It's important. At the moment, anything outside of the top 10, so player 11 through 69, which is currently the size of the publicly available board, if they moved up or down 3 spots or more, they get an arrow. And that just seemed like the appropriate scale. There's no particular reason for choosing that amount. But that will likely change as the board gets big. It'll probably be moved up and down 5, 10, maybe even half a round by the time it's all said and done. But folks are asking, we want to see how folks are moving up and down as boards are getting added and updated. And this at least gives a little bit of an indication of who's moving and shaking.
Shout out Brock.
Shout out Brock. Always.
Shout out Brock. All right. So Theo, hit us with number 13 and let's have Jamie talk us through this one.
Yeah, so real quick, just to highlight, I think we can just really quick hit a few guys that are either moving up or down significantly. So 13, Trey Savage. We've talked about him a little bit on the podcast before. He is a right-handed starting pitcher out of East Carolina. He is just really starting to put himself into like starting pitcher 3 territory, right? And so if we're reading the tea leaves, I think he might overtake Brody Brecht at some point here soon. Just having a dominant season, 54 innings so far, 166 ERA, 17 walks and 86 Ks. He had a little bit of a home run problem in 2023, and that has gone away. He's just been absolutely dominant, and such that he's starting to get some top 10, top 15 love in mock drafts, which Sean just told us are useless until later in the draft process. But Savage, I'm a big fan. I think he's awesome.
Okay, so now bring us down to number 15 for a guy that I think we're both fans of.
Yes, 100%. So this was also a part of that awesome conversation we had, right? Which was like, who is the first prep going to be? And pretty much the entire process, it's been Connor Griffin. And I think there is now an argument to be made that Bryce Rayner is maybe going to be the guy. He is a two-way player, something you also just brought up, right? So really smooth shortstop, good hitter. I think he's been up to like 97 on the mound, and he's getting steam as possibly the first prep off the board. So I think it's now a 2-horse race, whereas previously it was a 1. But those would be my 2 bets for the first high schooler off the board.
What are the chances? And I know that you don't have any insight on this, but I want to put you, put you to the fire here. Yeah. What are the chances that Rayner is available at pick 21?
Close to 0.
Okay.
I think we're looking at like much close to top 10 type of consensus by the time we're all said and done than 20, even though he's right in the middle at the moment.
Okay, so now we're going to jump down to 26, and 26 is a bothersome one for me because I got my son into fantasy baseball this year.
Yep.
We're drafting some non-professionals, and I'm like, the Serota guy, let's get this guy. And now 2 months later, it's not looking good.
Yeah, so this is Mike Serota is really interesting. So he is an outfielder from Northeastern. He was a consensus top 10 player at the beginning of this cycle, just had an incredible 2023 season. And this is going to be a really interesting acid test of like evaluation versus performance because he plays in a smaller conference. The competition is less high quality, but he just has really struggled to hit this season. He's still getting on base at a good clip. He's a really good athlete, plays center field. There's still a ton to like, and I think it's a really strong overall profile, good overall tools across the board, but the performance has not been there, and he is sinking pretty rapidly on folks' boards. I think the first iteration of this, he was like number 8 or number 9. So the fact that he's moved down to 26 in a couple of updates it's pretty swift. Hopefully he can have a stronger second half of the season and at least buoy his stock a little bit.
So I think at this point in time, both of us can probably feel what Twins types of potential prospects are.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of the year, I felt like Serota would be that type. But if he's not hitting, he can't be that type. Is there enough of a track record where a prospect like this would not have been around at 21 at the beginning of the season?
Mm-hmm.
Is there enough there? Has there been enough done that, and the Twins have had success with guys from the northeastern part of the U.S. is there enough there that he's someone that could be under consideration at pick 21?
I think so. I really like Serota's profile. Like, I think a lot about me and my preferences. I'm a fan of profiles where you can potentially accrue value in a number of different ways, right? And so with Serota, you have a prospect who has a chance to stick at center field. You have a guy who's a good base runner. It's above average pretty much everything. Obviously, that's a problem if the hitting and the production isn't there. But I've seen Serota on mocks actually go to the Twins with their second pick at 33. And so I think we're looking at like a back of the first round comp A type of range maybe at the moment. And I think this is one feature of the board that's worth mentioning, right, is the lag time. So the board doesn't really keep up with current performance. We'll notice if we went back up to the top, the Nick Kurtz actually fell a spot in this update. That's reacting to his slightly coolish streak from a few weeks ago, because most of the draft boards that are inputs into this are updated on roughly a monthly cadence, right? So some of the older ones there are the middle of March and they're a little outdated. So it's just something to be aware of that is like not as up to date as you would want it to be. And it's just a function of using so many boards as inputs. So I think Serota maybe eventually settles somewhere in the 25 to 35 range.
Okay.
And I do think he's kind of a twinsy profile for sure.
Okay, so last one here, Josh Hardle. Where is he falling right now?
Yeah, so Josh Hardle is really interesting, and I'm realizing looking at my notes that I didn't even indicate what position he's in, but he's taken a tumble, man. So Josh Hardle is a left-handed starter out of Wake Forest. Thanks, Theo. Theo found him. He always does. Josh Hardle's a left-handed starting pitcher out of Wake Forest who was just dominant in 2023 for that awesome Wake team. He was part of that rotation with Rhett Lauder, now of the Cincinnati Reds. And Hardle just had this incredible season, 2.51 ERA as a starting pitcher last year in the ACC and in a deep College World Series run. The thought was that his stuff was maybe going to take a little bit of a step forwards in the offseason. He's never been a velocity guy. His fastball's always been in the like 90 to 92 range. He has just really, really struggled. The command hasn't been as crisp as it usually is. He has a 5.52 ERA so far this season. He's another guy that was top 20 consensus at the beginning of the process, who has now dropped all the way down to, what number are we looking at there?
39.
39. I think it's going to drop further. I think we're moving towards the 50s there eventually, potentially, because I just, Sean made the comment about college pitching. Sometimes, every year you'll have some performers and some who kind of drop. Hardle has definitely been a profile who's dropped pretty significantly this season so far.
And the part that's going to save him, I think there's a couple of things. Wake Forest has a great reputation.
They do.
He throws left-handed, which means he's going to get every opportunity to be successful. And due to 6'5", 210, and 21 years old. Like, I feel like there's enough there where you can't go overboard on so far a couple months. And to me, he would be the type of player that if he starts to tumble and you get him, like the Twins drafting 60, if he's there at 60, you take that shot with a bonus pick.
Right.
And
well, yeah, and a couple of things on that, Jeremy, right? One is like thinking, we had this conversation, and this is nice that we get to follow up these questions with kind of applying it to some guys, right? Let's take Josh Hardle as an example. I just commented that like velocity isn't really a strength. What is something Twins player development does really well?
Adds velocity.
Adds a couple of ticks on a fastball. That's one thing. And then a general like principle I tried to hold on to when looking at these guys and digging through as much video footage as I can find in as many games as I can watch is if a player's done it before, they can do it. Right? So Josh Hardle has put up what did we say it was? He's put up a 2.51 ERA over a full lengthy college baseball season in the ACC. He is capable of that. He's already done it. And so that's something to keep in mind to try not to overreact to this year's performance.
For sure.
To your
All right,
point.
couple other guys to highlight here. Theo can go up to 22. Cam Smith, third baseman, Florida State.
Yeah. So, folks they've enjoyed us digging into a couple of guys in a little bit more depth. So we're going to try and spotlight one or two or three per week. So Cam Smith is interesting. And Jeremy, I looked back at my first ever consensus board, which was actually in 2022.
Okay.
And it had 60 guys, and there was only 5 boards that were inputs. It was really lame. But Cam Smith was like a top 65-ish guy then as a high school player. So he's now, I think he's a draft eligible sophomore, third baseman out of Florida State. He's hitting 411, 486, 669 this year with 9 home runs. I think the thing you like about a profile like this is he's taken a step forwards pretty much in every aspect of his offensive approach. So he's increased the walks. There's less chase. There's better bat to ball skills. That's like, if we remember Chase Davis from last draft cycle, who was an outfielder out of Arizona,
Who you absolutely loved.
who I absolutely loved and still do, and is off to a good start in the Cardinal system this year. That's the kind of improvements that speak volumes, I think, when there's just strong improvements across the board. So he's a guy that's been rising. He's up to 22 on consensus now. Really expect him to be a top 20 pick when we're done.
Now, his defensive profile, is it more like he's listed as a third baseman, but not going to stick at third base? He's going to be an outfielder or first baseman, or is his profile more of he's a third baseman that maybe you could pass or try at shortstop, but he's super athletic. Maybe you could play in the center of the field.
Yeah.
In the outfielder, second base. Like, there's two different ways. Third base is the hard one, right? Because
it is.
You're never sure where on the spectrum they fit.
It is, and I think he's kind of in between those two things. Like, he's not Nolan Arenado, but he's not a butcher at all at third base. I think he has a good shot to stick there as a pro. No way he's moving to shortstop. But if you have someone who you're going to start out at third base in pro ball, then you have the fallback of, like, corner outfield spots, first base. DH is the last resort. So I do think he's a legit third base prospect, and he's going to give you a solid glove there.
So here's my April 17th prediction.
Okay.
I think Cam Smith sounds like a guy that the Twins would target at 21.
Okay.
Which means the Brewers would probably target him at 17. Brewers love third baseman. Brewers take Cam Smith at 17.
Okay, you heard it there first.
Okay.
I like that. I do think that's like roughly the range. I think that some of the talent above him is going to be hard to surpass, but he's made solid movement. I think he was around 35 when we first got started here.
All right, let's jump down to 28. So we're talking end of the first round. Here's a name that's new to me. Tell me all about him.
Carson Benj is an outfielder who plays for Oklahoma State. He has been on the radar. This is a great example of this idea of, like, when a player or a prospect doesn't do something, just kind of imagine what it would be like if they did do that thing. In 2023, he just hit ground balls all the time. And he was pretty dinged for that. And he's figured out how not to do that in 2024. So corner outfield type prospect, hitting 317, 443, 572, 6 home runs so far, 34 walks, and just 29 Ks in 37 games. So it's a little bit of a hit over power profile, but the power is going to be like average to maybe even above average. Doesn't chase, good bat to ball. He's a two-way player, so he actually pitches for Oklahoma State. He's been up to 97 on the mound. Just a really well-rounded offensive profile. That's kind of my jam. I like Bench a lot. I think he's going to stick somewhere in that 20 to 30 range.
Okay, and the last guy that we're going to talk about on the board update, number 38, James Tibbs III.
Okay, here's my hot take about Tibbs. I think he would be a top 12 pick if he was a better athlete. So
there's so many things that there's so many jokes to make on that one.
So, right? Okay, so that sounds disrespectful, and it's really not meant to be. He's 38 right now. Let me just hit you with his numbers for the year, and you can just be wowed by this. He's hitting 410, .500, 849 is his slug.
It's impressive.
15 home runs, 25 walks, and just 12 strikeouts.
Okay. So what is he listed as? 6 feet, 205?
Mm-hmm.
So he just lacks quick
It's just
twitch,
like
he just
lacks explosion.
Okay.
Not super fast, just like average foot speed. Definitely a corner outfield profile, but probably at the bottom end of that range where it's like corner outfield. And if things go poorly, you're probably looking at first base, which I think is a ding for him. But the offensive production is just so good. And this is a Florida team that's like a top 3, 4, 5 team in the country. He plays on the same team as Cam Smith. This Florida State team has just been dominant. He's a big reason why it's going to be at least like above average hit and power, I think, potentially at the next level. I just think he's a really safe bet to be a productive big league bat.
Okay. That was fun. We should do that every week.
Okay.
Because that gives me, I mean, you're in the weeds on these guys, and this is where I'm starting to hear names and coming up with ideas. But now here's another thing. We kind of talked about this at the end of the last episode. So I'm going to throw this one back to you because I think this would be something that people will do on the consensus board, and we'll just kind of talk about it here.
Yeah. So just by chance at the end of the last episode, we're like, well, let's see who the Twins would take in their first few picks by consensus. Just as a thought exercise, right? Obviously, they're not drafting by consensus, but given that we're updating the board on a weekly basis, these names are going to change frequently. So we figured we'd expand that, just quickly whip through, and I'll give you the kind of names and the positions and kind of demos, and you can tell me if you feel like which one of these teams, if any, you feel good about their kind of haul from a consensus perspective, right? So we'll quickly go through Cubs, Brewers, and Twins. So Cubs, they first pick at 14. Cam Caminiti is a left-handed pitcher, prep pitcher out of Arizona. He has been one of the most consistently steadfast names on that consensus board. He has not budged an inch since the first one. Just really solid prep lefty. Ryan Johnson would be their second pick by consensus. We talked about him last week. Right-handed pitcher out of DBU. Looks a really weird look, but also throws like 100-mile-per-hour turbo fastball and a really crazy slider. So that'd be the Cubs haul to date.
Should we talk about that?
Yeah.
Let's talk about each team before. So
okay,
that seems to me like the type of draft that the Cubs would have, right? Caminiti would be that high ceiling, really replacement for Jackson Ferris in their system.
Mm-hmm.
And when they not without having that pick, having that huge gap in between picks, I think you kind of shoot for the stars. They did that last year. Kind of went off the board, but taking a guy that's maybe got some question marks, but has the ability to crank it up. That seems like a Cubs type draft. Getting two pitchers and getting ceiling. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I like it a ton. Speaking of Cubs drafts, Jackson Wiggins' little brother is draft eligible this year. He's like literally
catcher, right? Is he a catcher?
No, he's exactly the same guy, a like 6'6" prep pitcher who already throws 99. Yeah, I agree. I like this for the Cubs a ton. I like Caminiti. The fact that he hasn't budged, I think, says a lot about him as a prep profile and as a prep pitcher. The Cubs farm system is so loaded that if I was in the Cubs and Brewers spot, I would want to be taking shots. And I think Caminiti is a good shot.
So my thing, and this is just a generalization.
I
feel like there's some bloodlines, right?
Oh yeah.
And so
cousin.
Does that sometimes add some dollars? Like, does he become a harder sign? Does he drop because of a price tag? Again, generalizing here, that he could drop into a team like the Cubs who are willing to spend, or a team that maybe has a bigger bonus pool that they could push him down. because he's going to be one of the top prep arms, right?
Yeah, he definitely is.
And so we've seen how those kind of work funny, right? Where a team like the Marlins somehow aligns their pool to get multiple top prep arms,
Mm-hmm.
and that demographic becomes so volatile because the price tag is an enormous part of
Yeah.
where these guys end up. Okay, let's move on to the crew.
Okay, so Brewers, we have 3 picks for them on the board right now. So at 17 by consensus right now, they would take PJ Morlando, outfielder / first baseman out of South Carolina. Big power. Also, really solid hit tool as well. I think the ding there is like the defensive spectrum thing, which applies to so many prospects in this class. At 34, currently, they would take Luke Holman, right-handed Friday night starter out of LSU. We talked about him quite a bit last week. Just incredible production in the SEC, and I think that says a lot. And then their pick at 57 by consensus right now would be Will Taylor, who's the outfielder out of Clemson. He's an interesting one. He was like a 2-sport athlete, played baseball and football there, had a bad injury, was a like legit plus defensive center fielder before said injury. I think has lost a little bit of that burst, but just an incredible athlete, and has had a really solid 2024 season so far. He's been pretty consistent name also.
And I think that draft would be an acceptable draft, but I don't think that's how the Brewers go.
I agree.
Based on how the Brewers have drafted, I think the names will be different. And we've talked about Holman. Morlando's not someone that we've talked too much about, but I could see the Brewers doing some different things that maybe you wonder about, and then by the end it all makes sense, and you really like how they did things.
Yeah. So Twins, we get to talk about 4 picks with the Twins because I expanded the board to 69 deliberately because that was the next Twins pick. Right now, their consensus spots are extremely prep heavy and extremely pitching heavy, which I think will make a lot of folks pretty happy. People always want arms in the draft is my read, whether or not they should. So a 21 by consensus right now is right-handed pitcher out of Louisiana, William Schmidt. He's been up. His fastball took a velo jump this spring. He's been up to like 97. His curveball is nuts. Everyone should go get a look at William Schmidt's curveball. It's like a 3,000 plus RPM, just monster. Their pick at 33 is Billy Amick, who we coincidentally talked about last week, third baseman out of Tennessee, who we said has had a little bit better defense than we thought he might have. He was out for an appendectomy, homered on the first pitch he saw after coming back after being out for like only 5 or 6 days, which was impressive. Wow. Then their picks of 60 and 69 are both prep arms. At 60 right now is Owen Hall. He's a right-handed pitcher out of Oklahoma. He's kind of like a wiry, spindly frame guy, but you know, Sean, who was just on, said there's velo everywhere. He's already throwing pretty hard. A lot of the prep arms you'll read profiles for, right? Say like fastball up to 95, 96. One really promising breaking pitch, emerging changeup. That's kind of the vibe. And then their pick at 69 is a different kind of a pitcher. His name's Trey Gregory Alford, right-handed pitcher out of Colorado. Colorado, not really a baseball hotbed, but he's like a really classic power pitcher. He's like 6'6", super imposing frame. He's been up to 99. A really nasty breaking pitch too. And as you might expect with like a bigger framed guy, control and command is the issue. Strike throwing is the issue. Getting all the moving parts kind of in sync, compact, repeatable delivery, all those type of things. But curious what you think about this. 3 prep pitchers out of 4 feels highly, highly unlikely.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, right? But I was surprised with the Twins going to the prep demographic as much as they did last year. So maybe I need to back off that. I hope that the Twins take a prep pitcher with one of their top 4.
Mm-hmm.
If they took 2, I would be pleasantly surprised. If they took 3, I would be shocked.
Agreed.
Again, part of that has so much to do with price tags. I think they go college hitter, right? And then maybe prep pitcher, and then probably hitter. And then at 69, maybe that's where you start to see a college pitcher. Maybe it's something different, and then it's the run of college pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
And the Twins have had so much success having the drafts line up the way that they do. I know we've talked about catchers being a stronger group, that maybe you see a catcher going in this top 4. At the end of the day, though, I mean, if you take 3 prep pitchers, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, I don't see it either. I think it's an interesting thought exercise. Billy Amick feels like the most Twinsy pick out of all of these. That like really solid bat value at 33 is good, and I kind of agree. Like you want to take a pop on one one really promising arm in those top 4. I would be at this point. And this is just queuing us up to be wrong, but that's what makes the draft fun. At this point, I would be pretty surprised if the Twins didn't take a college bat at 21. That's just my thoughts, how the board is stacking up at the moment. But we'll go through this thought exercise again next week, assuming there are new boards that come out between now and then, and the order shifts and changes a little bit. And we'll do that every week, as long as folks get something out of it. I think we'll pause there for today, man. Dwight Olson and Josiah Waldner sending questions. We'll definitely put those on hold for next week. Really appreciate you guys sending them. Didn't want to skip past that. And if you enjoyed the show, encourage folks to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Destination The Show, on Twitter at DTS_pod1. We would absolutely appreciate support, especially with this episode. This is a big deal for us. So any ways that you can support, retweet the content, etc., will be greatly appreciated. And as always, we will be back for another episode next week, in which we're doing what, Jeremy, next week?
Mock drafting.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it only makes sense to do a mock draft day before the NFL draft.
That's right. 100%. So next week, mock draft coming to you from Pennsylvania for me, and your beautiful basement for you. But until then, enjoy all of the baseball that's not the Minnesota Twins, because they're in a rut. Later.